Because we were created, because the devil comes to do what? Kill, steal, and destroy. Because he doesn't want to see you function to your maturity so that you will not be healthy. God understood that you and I will feel very weak and we'll have deficiencies, right? So he says, look, I've created, Peter says, God's manifold grace goes out in so many directions that it literally is like, it's like a gap insurance, he says. If you ever were in an accident and your car is totaled out and all of a sudden you still owe on that vehicle, I hope you get gap insurance, because if they total out that car and you still owe a couple of $1,000s on it, guess what? That gap insurance comes in, right? It covers the deficiency. Yes. God's grace does the same thing with us. Because we are unhealthy in our households, because we're not living and producing and we're not working into that degree of functioning healthy, we become very weak. There's weak areas. And because there's a deficiency. And guess what the grace does? God's grace comes in, covers that out, allows us to meet God's standard of what true health really is. The thing is, the process is Clyde is stepping into that role of responsibility, and he's received that gift. It becomes a healthy environment as he steps up to the plate and begins to function in his giftedness for the sake of his household. Then all of a sudden, he marries. He has Olga. Olga now comes under the covering. Olga also has been imparted gifts as well. These gifts have been imparted so that not only is it just for her sake, but as she functions the responsibility as a woman and as the wife to Clyde, what's going to happen is that she's going to perform her duties as God has given her, imparted the gifts in her, so that her husband would be healthy. That is the reason in Proverbs chapter 31, it says, call this woman blessed, because she functions healthy in her responsibilities.
Praise God.
You understand? She's been imparted gifts, and therefore her husband can stand and sit at the city gates and say that he's been blessed. Why? Because what's happened is Clyde is functioning in his role as he should. He's been imparted the gift so that his household would be established and grow to its maturity. Olga therefore does the same thing. She flows in that. And then all of a sudden you create a healthy environment, and you have a healthy marriage, and you have healthy children. Come on, somebody give God some praise. Now, listen to this. What happens is sometimes what happens is when one individual is not functioning as they should. And if Clyde decides to say, look, I'm not going to function in the responsibility as the head of my house, then there's a deficiency, right? Then something needs to happen. So normally what happens is the next person, the next adult in the household, begins to take on that responsibility in that role. So because Clyde steps out of the picture, I'm sorry, Clyde, I'm going to push you around. And then all of a sudden, Olga has to come in and start taking in that role. How many of you know there's only so much that you can do? Yes. And as a result, what happens is because Clyde has decided to fall away, Olga has to step up and take up some of the slack. Who's doing her responsibilities if she's having to do Clyde's? And that's why the devil comes in. He says he's come to kill, steal, and destroy. He wants to take you out of your function. Yes, so that he can all of a sudden, what happens is that this person has to take on that role. What's happening here? And if you have children, the children have to take up the slack here. Peter says, I praise God. He says, right? He says, we're called to be good stewards. And then he says, of the manifold grace of God. What he's saying to us is that because is a multitude, it's a opening so great that goes out of his grace to care for that deficiency. That because Clyde had decided not to be in his role and not to function in what he's supposed to do, that God's going to be merciful enough that as Olga comes up, he's going to give her the strength to be able to carry on. It's going to be a struggle. The environment's not going to be healthy as it would be if there's alignment. But praise God for his grace. Amen.